Welcome back, Sunrisers, and thanks so much for staying with us. We hope you're having a great time with us. Now, this morning, we have the pleasure of introducing the author of Josephine's Jamaican Journey, Joan P. Hamilton, who will be sharing insights into her collection of short stories, which are set in Jamaica's post-independence years of the 1960s. She'll be discussing how the books portray Josephine's life growing up and the cultural and societal shifts she witnessed. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you so much, TK. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you.
Yes,
it's great to have you. All right, let's jump in because I'm very curious about this, right? So first of all, when did Josephine's Jamaican Journey launch? Because there are two books, right? Part 1 and Part 2.
Yes, Book 1 and Book 2. And
Okay.
Book 1 was done last in 2024, May, and October of 2024 I did Book 2.
Okay, and what inspired you to write Josephine's Jamaican Journey?
Well, these books I started writing in 2000, 25 years ago, when I moved to Canada. And so I would feel homesick, and I would just sit with a cup of coffee and write my happy memories of growing up here. I grew up in the inner city in Kingston. There's a little corridor between 3 miles and 2 miles that I grew up. Went to school at Hagley Park Road, and I found that whenever I was homesick, I would sit and just write about the things that I remember, which is why the stories are being told by Josephine, because it's a little girl's memories. Even though I was grown at 25 years ago, and still, I still think in her voice when I think of growing up in Jamaica, and so that's why I did that.
So the book is written from a child's eye, basically, a child's perspective, growing up in that time.
In that environment.
And how do you think that perspective, differs from, say, coming from an adult perspective and point of view?
Well, I think it's a purer way of looking at things, because, and Josephine seemed to have had an insight from very early into human behavior. So she knew who to avoid, who to put a like, and she was able to sum up people very well. And so within my own family, I'm part of even that dynamic was difficult because my mother was Indian, her grandparents came from India, and my father was black. And so even those dynamics, Josephine was able to properly, I think, when I look back now and with an adult eye, actually navigate carefully with her older sister, whom in the book is called Carla. They were able to avoid the areas that were difficult for children at that time. So the child's point of view is very important, and it actually, now that I'm older and a grandmother, I realize that you need to be very careful with children because they're seeing everything. They have to put their own construction because they don't understand life as we sometimes, and even as adults, we don't fully understand. But they are construing things all the time, and so we need to be careful. We don't need to handle them with a lot of heavy emotions, but we need to act. Get down on your haunches sometimes with the kids and see what they're seeing, because they're seeing everything. And that's what Josephine did.
Well, what's interesting about the book, when I was leafing through and reading a couple of the short stories, is it's an interesting mix of history, from a child's perspective. So there's nostalgia, there's like some learnings for people who weren't around that time, because things are very different. Who would you say this book is for? Who is the ideal reader for a book like this?
So when I wrote it, as I said, the stories are for me, but I've found as I've gone places promoting the stories that people in my age group are really, really enjoying the nostalgia. But little ones, I have a little fan who's only 9 years old, and she is so into the stories, and her mom has to be explaining all the nuances. She lives in Canada, and I've heard of another little one in the States, and they want to know what some of the things are, which is why the books have glossaries, the stories have glossaries at the back of them, because there are some things that it's best to just put it down so that the parents can access the information. Some of our cultural things like like the John Canoe, for instance, it's explained in the glossary of the books.
I know that you're passionate about mentoring and mentorship. How would you say your experience with writing or using writing as a form of expression helps with that or impacts that aspect of you?
I think when you mentor people, one of the things that you have to do is empower them to be themselves, to tap into what are their own strengths and giftings. And writing helps us to do that, helps us to focus and zero in on what are the things we like, what we don't like, what are our strengths and weaknesses. And so mentorship has a place in writing because it really, I know in psychology, for instance, they'll tell you, let your child write because that way you can see and draw, that way you can see what they're thinking and what they're feeling. Yeah.
Joan, you speak mentorship and, you know, as an author, a published author, not once but twice.
Yes, yes.
Speak to me, to that person who has a dream of being an author as well, is watching you now and saying, she's doing what I'm doing,
yes,
or even as a child and saying, I want to do this,
yes,
you know.
Yes, yes.
Tell me, what would you say to that person?
You know, I feel as if I fell into this thing by accident, even though I know it's not, because I'm a firm believer in, I am of Christian faith, and I think that God really providentially brought this about. When I asked him for a legacy 4 years ago, this is the result of it, but it's been in the making from 25 years ago. So I would say to young writers and people who have a dream, start. That's the first thing, because I sat and I wrote, and I did not realize that 25 years after, well, 23 years after, because I started writing 2023, getting them together, that they would become something. So I say to people who really, really are enjoying writing, as I did as a kid, and reading, first thing with the children, read, 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 read. The tablets are fine, but take them away and give them even a half an hour of reading. Encourage them to write book reports, because you will find that they're really finding within themselves ways of expressing what they are seeing that is not expressed in the format that they're watching. And then the second thing is for those who are more adult and so on, there are so many avenues now that you can tap into that will help you to develop your writing, develop your product, because, you know, I wrote, but it didn't necessarily look like that. It has to be, what did my editor call it? It has to be correct for the reading audience. So I might say something and she says, no, that might put a wrong spin on it, you know. So there's lots of avenues for those who are older to actually tap into ways of writing properly, writing programs and so on.
All right, so final thing. For that person says, I'm interested, it sound like a nice memory lane drive.
Yes, yes,
you know
yes,
what I mean?
yes.
Especially if I'm in the diaspora, you know.
Oh, yes.
Give me just an example of maybe an aspect or an excerpt from the story that really resonated with you or resonates with others, that people can get a feel of what's inside Josephine's Jamaican journey.
So there's a story in the book called The Tenement Yard. And it showcased all the characters that lived at a particular time in the yard that I lived. And I think in the story it's about 7 or 8 different characters. There's one lady, she appears in 2 stories. I call her Miss Beryl the Beater.
The Beater, man.
Yes,
about the Beater,
and then there is Miss Sheila, who was a very early entrepreneur. She would travel with her bags and her pans and come and put them out under the mango tree and sell the things from that. And her favorite saying was, when she come to collect her money and the ladies didn't have the money to pay her, she would say, "Una better than me, because una have a man and I don't have a man. This is why I'm walking and selling." So, you know, the story of the tenement yard, I think, encapsulates the spirit of the stories, because there are so many characters in the tenement yard and they were all making inputs, and Josephine was busy recording them in her memory.
Yes, yes. And there's beautiful illustration, there's rich description, there is, you know, interesting stories that really carries you back into a time gone for Jamaica.
Yes.
And so I can definitely see how somebody would get engrossed.
It's worth preserving those
engrossed
stories.
in this book.
Yes,
and yes, as you said, it's almost something that I would give to a child and say, listen, read this, you know, because this is what Jamaica was like.
And they're short stories.
And they're short stories with beautiful illustrations.
Yes, absolutely.
And beautiful wording, if I might say so myself.
Thank you, my dear.
So how do people grab a book at this time?
Okay, so they're available on Amazon. They're available in Indigo in Canada, and there are places in England that I don't remember. But here in Jamaica, more importantly, they're at Craft Cottage.
Craft Cottage.
My Jamaica, and Source of Light Missions at Hagley Park Plaza.
Got you. Well, pick up a copy, pick up 2, pick up 3, pick up 4. Josephine's Jamaican Journey. Our linguistic guest has been Joan P. Hamilton, author. And coming up next, it's news time with, well, yours truly. Stay with us.
Thank you.
Well, the race is not for the swift, you know, but for all those that will endure to the end. And you know, say Jesus will defend. yo. Me lace up my shoes and me pull up my socks. Me do me two stretch and now me ready for the